Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a single source. It's quite focused and presents a very critical take on immigration, multiculturalism, and the influence of certain ethnic groups in Canada.
That's right. And just so you know, our goal here isn't to agree or disagree. We're just exploring this one specific document, trying to really understand its arguments, the claims it makes, the whole structure of its viewpoint.
Exactly. It's about mapping out what this particular source says without us weighing in on whether it's right or wrong.
And it jumps right in, doesn't it? No slow buildup.
No, it kicks things off with some hard numbers, data points really, about political power. Specifically, the representation of Southeast Asian groups.
Yes, the author immediately zeroes in on Sikh representation in Parliament. They state there are 18 Sikh MPs.
18, and they break that down, don't they?
They do. 13 Liberal, 4 Conservative, and 1 NDP. That's the specific count given.
Okay, 18 MPs. But then comes the context the author uses to make that number seem significant.
Right. They point out that Sikhs make up about, what, 2.12% of the Canadian population?
Only 2.12%, and yet 18 seats.
And here's the comparison that the source really hammers home. India itself, it says, only has 13 Sikh MPs in its parliament.
Wow. So more Sikh MPs in Canada than in India, proportionally speaking, based on these numbers.
That's the implication, yes. The source presents it as a striking number, suggesting a kind of rapid ascent into political power here.
And it doesn't stop there with the data, does it?
No, it adds to the picture. It mentions 4 Hindu MPs and 13 Muslim MPs, also noting they are primarily of Southeast Asian background. It reinforces this idea of specific groups gaining political foothold.
Which leads directly into the source's main concern here, loyalty.
Exactly. The document asserts that these representatives seem to prioritize the interests of their own ethnic or religious communities over, perhaps, a broader Canadian interest. That's the claim.
And they single out a specific example.
They do. Jagmeet Singh is mentioned. The source calls him a fervent proponent of Sikh identity and independence.
And to really drive the point home about loyalty.
They state that the Indian government actually classifies him as a terrorist, and he's banned from traveling there. The source uses this as, evidence of a fundamental conflict in loyalties.
So for the author, this isn't just about representation, it's about allegiance.
Pretty much. The author seems to want leaders who are, completely focused on preserving Canada, its culture, its nationhood as they see it.
They even offer an example of what they consider ideal leadership commitment.
Yes, interestingly, they point to the Bloc Québécois leaders as representing that kind of singular focus on their nation, in that case Quebec, that they wish all Canadian leaders had.
Okay, so that idea of undivided loyalty is really crucial for understanding where the source goes next.
Absolutely. It transitions from political representation to the broader topic of mass immigration itself.
And the source's verdict on that is pretty blunt.
Extremely blunt. It says mass immigration has and can only ever be detrimental to our nation. Full stop.
Strong words. How does it connect immigration to societal problems?
It links demographics to social decay, particularly crime. The claim is that low-status immigrants are inclined towards criminality.
How do they back that up? Is it just an assertion?
Well, they mention a general rise in petty crimes, but also point to more serious things, like the spike in auto thefts in Toronto and Montreal. That's the specific example used.
Right, the car thefts have been big news. But is the source explicitly linking the immigration status of the perpetrators to those specific crimes? Or is it more of a correlation equals causation argument?
It seems to be more theoretical. The document puts forward this idea, let's call it the identity cleavage theory.
Okay, what's the gist of that?
The argument is basically that if a group sees itself as separate, as distinct from the majority culture, they're less likely to feel bound by its rules.
So they don't feel beholden to their neighbors, as the source puts it.
Exactly. The idea is that the host nation becomes kind of foreign to them, something they can potentially exploit without feeling the same moral connection or concern for the impact.
Because they lack that shared national and historical bond, the one the source says unites Canadians of European stock.
That's precisely the argument. That lack of a shared bond, in this view, erodes the social trust needed to keep crime low.
And this leads to another interesting point the source makes about insolvable issues.
Right. The argument is that the cultural conflicts or needs brought in by large immigrant groups are fundamentally alien to Euro-Canadians.
Alien what way?
The source contrasts them with existing Canadian issues like, say, language debates or regional differences. Those, the author argues, are understood. They're part of the Canadian fabric, even if contentious.
But the new issues, brought from elsewhere,
Are seen as completely foreign. Things the host population can't really grasp or fix because they don't share the history or the context. They're insolvable from a Euro-Canadian perspective, according to the source.
Okay, so if immigration is presented as so detrimental, why does the source think people come to Canada? What's the motivation?
Purely economic, according to this document. It paints a picture of Canada as just a prosperous nation, a place to get rich, offering a lifestyle not typically available in, quote, the third world.
And that motivation itself is framed negatively.
Yes, as innately exploitative. The source argues that if you're only coming for wealth, you don't really care about the country itself, you're just using its resources.
Which explains why the source demands such a high degree of assimilation.
A very high degree. It basically wants immigrants who are willing to completely shed their former identity.
To the point where their descendants become indistinguishable from Indigenous Canadians.
That's the phrase used. That's the ideal outcome for this author. But they also admit this is harder the more culturally or ethnically different the immigrant group is from the, quote, Canadian norm.
So greater distance makes that complete assimilation less likely, in their view.
Correct.
Now, the economic argument is interesting because the source seems to argue all immigration is bad, economically speaking, even skilled immigration.
Yes, that's a key point. For low-skilled immigrants, the argument isn't even about boosting the economy. It's that they form a new slave-like caste, exploited by corporations.
So not an economic benefit, but a tool for corporate exploitation.
That's the claim. But then it also says high-skilled immigrants are also detrimental.
Why? You'd think skilled workers would be seen as positive.
Because, according to the source, they compete directly with native-born Canadians.
Compete for what? University spots? Jobs?
Exactly. For education, for high-status professions. The source frames it as displacing the natural inheritors of those elite positions within Canadian society.
Which connects directly to their concerns about who controls the country's future.
Yeah.
This fear of displacement at the top.
Precisely. And that leads to a very specific, quite radical policy proposal.
Which is?
Restricting university education primarily to native-born Canadians.
Wow. Why universities specifically?
Because the source explicitly identifies universities as the place where the next generation of leaders, the elites, are formed and credentialed. It's about controlling the pipeline to power.
It's a gatekeeping mechanism, then, to prevent foreign leadership.
Yes. The fear is ending up with leaders whose mindset is alien, whose loyalties are seen as divided.
And this ties back to the institutions themselves.
It does. The source talks about institutional drift. The idea is that Canadian institutions were designed by and for, quote, us, meaning Euro-Canadians, and they work naturally for them.
But if managed by others?
They lose that natural familiarity, that fidelity to their original purpose. They drift.
Drift meaning they become inefficient, or their actual goals change.
The latter. It's a deeper concern about the mission and integrity of institutions changing when run by people from different cultural backgrounds, weakening the nation from within.
But the source does acknowledge this isn't only about non-Europeans, right? It broadens the scope a bit.
It does, which is interesting. It says the issue is just more visible with non-Europeans now, but it uses historical examples.
Like the German Canadians during the World Wars.
Exactly. Citing concerns about potential dual loyalties, even among culturally similar Europeans back then. It shows this suspicion isn't entirely new for the author, even if the focus is different today.
And there's a more recent example used, too.
Yes, the Ukrainian diaspora. The source claims their influence, especially voters in the prairies, pushed Canada towards a more hawkish foreign policy towards the Russian Federation, even before 2014 or 2022, mentioning the Harper era specifically.
So the point is that organized ethnic groups, European or not, can and do influence policy based on their own priorities, sometimes overriding a broader national interest, according to this source.
That's the argument. It all fits into the source's final diagnosis of the situation.
Which is framed as
the victory of the organized minority over the disorganized majority.
Because these groups are cohesive, they have political clout.
Yes, and politicians respond to that power. The source criticizes politicians for, wearing foreign garb and celebrating holidays honoring foreign gods, seeing it as pandering to these organized blocs.
But the author doesn't think this situation will last.
No, they call the power of the foreigner transient. They believe the system is unsustainable, partly because the ideology behind it, described as post-colonial, post-white, and post-Western, is apparently being rejected elsewhere in the West.
Okay, and this leads to a pretty dark psychological theory at the end, this resentment theory.
Yeah, it's a complex idea. The source claims that non-Europeans in a European majority context kind of depend on that European standard for their own identity. They do not exist without us, is the phrase used.
And this dependency breeds resentment.
That's the claim, that this resentment causes them to lash out against European culture, people, faith, as a way to assert their own independence, paradoxically, by attacking the very standard they supposedly rely on.
It frames the whole situation as a deep-seated conflict, not just disagreement.
Definitely. It's presented as a structural conflict rooted in dependency and resentment.
So, given that diagnosis, what's the source's final advice? What's the call to action for the native population?
It's very internally focused. The solution offered is to essentially beat the organized minorities at their own game by building their own social capital, forming strong communities, and crucially, raising children who share and perpetuate our views. It's about internal consolidation and organization.
Right. So we've traced the argument all the way from those initial MP statistics through theories on crime, exploitation, institutional decay, and landed on this strategy for cultural self-preservation.
It's a very self-contained worldview presented in this document, and I think if you're trying to understand its core logic, that link between national stability and demanding immigrants completely abandon their old identity is key.
Absolutely. The source fundamentally rejects the idea that simple residency makes you Canadian. It insists being Canadian something more substantial.
So the question for you, the listener, to reflect on, based purely on what we've unpacked from this source, what are those substantial attributes the author seems to value above just living here? Think about the emphasis placed on lineage, shared history, cultural norms, and that idea of institutional fidelity.
Lots to think about there.
Until next time.